It began like any other weekday morning in London. The city was waking up under a soft haze, the kind that draped over the Thames and gave everything that silvery, almost cinematic tone. But inside the glass panels of the Good Morning Britain studio, there was nothing ordinary about this day. For weeks, whispers had filled the newsroom corridors, growing louder each day, until finally confirmed. Meghan Markle herself would be sitting opposite Piers Morgan for a live, unedited interview. Producers knew the gravity of what they were setting up. Piers had not held back his opinions about the Duchess over the years, and the world knew it. He was fiery, unapologetic, and prided himself on cutting through what he called celebrity spin. Meghan, on the other hand, had built an entire image around control, measured words, curated appearances, and carefully constructed PR narratives. To see those two worlds collide on live television was a spectacle the public could not resist. In the control room, monitors flickered with test feeds. Technicians adjusted audio levels and camera angles. The faint buzz of fluorescent lights mixed with the rustle of cue cards and the soft click of producers' headsets. Piers stood near the coffee machine, reading through the latest briefing notes, but everyone knew he didn't need them. He had already written his own script in his head, sharp, confrontational, and impossible to ignore. Across town, Meghan's PR team gathered in a sleek black SUV heading toward the ITV studios. Her personal assistant scrolled through a tablet, reviewing talking points one last time. The strategy was clear. Meghan wanted to reclaim her narrative. After years of headlines that painted her as manipulative, distant, or self-serving, this was her chance to show composure and grace. To speak directly to the British public again, but deep down, even her team knew the risk. They weren't walking into a friendly chat. They were walking into Piers Morgan's arena. As dawn broke fully over London, social media began to stir. The news had leaked overnight, and by 7 a.m., hashtags were already trending. Piers vs. Meghan, live showdown, the interview of the year. Viewers across the UK were tuning in early, setting reminders, texting friends. Everyone wanted to see what would happen when the man who famously stormed off his own show would finally face the woman who made him do it. In the makeup room, Meghan sat quietly in front of the mirror. The stylist's brush moved gently through her hair, but her eyes didn't leave her reflection. She looked calm, composed, yet behind the calm was calculation. Every blink, every breath was practiced. She knew she would be under a microscope, every expression dissected by millions. She wasn't here to argue, at least not openly. She was here to outclass. But that's the problem with live television. It doesn't always go according to plan. Meanwhile, Piers entered the studio floor, his trademark smirk in place. His co-host, Susanna Reid, shot him a nervous glance. "You're going to behave today, right?" she asked softly, almost joking. Piers shrugged, his tone light but his intent clear. "I'll ask the questions people are too afraid to ask." "That's my job." Behind him, the camera crew exchanged knowing looks. They'd seen this before. When Piers smelled blood in the water, restraint wasn't part of the vocabulary. 5 minutes before air, the floor manager began the countdown. The tension was palpable. The audience seating area was already filled with a mix of journalists, staff, and a few lucky viewers chosen from social media contests. The energy felt electric, like everyone in the room knew something historic was about to unfold. One of the assistant producers whispered into her headset, "She's here." Meghan entered the set from the side corridor, flanked by her PR manager and a studio handler. Her outfit was impeccable, a soft ivory blouse paired with tailored navy trousers, simple yet commanding. The moment she stepped under the studio lights, every conversation in the room paused. Piers looked up from his notes and their eyes met. The history between them hung heavy in the air, unspoken but undeniable. It wasn't just a meeting of two personalities. It was a collision of two narratives. "Good morning, Meghan," Piers said with that trademark half-smile that could mean either charm or challenge. "Good morning, Piers," she replied evenly, her voice smooth, practiced, unflinching. The politeness was surface level, a performance for the cameras. Beneath it, both were sharpening their blades. As the countdown hit 10 seconds, the studio fell silent. The red light above the main camera blinked to life. Theme music faded. And just like that, Good Morning Britain went live to millions of viewers across the UK and beyond. Susanna began with the usual warm introduction, setting a calm tone that contrasted with the growing tension visible between her co-host and their guest. "Joining us this morning," she began, is Meghan, Duchess of Sussex, who's here to talk about her new foundation and recent projects. The first few minutes were cordial, even friendly. Meghan spoke confidently about mental health initiatives, women's empowerment, and her charity's work with underprivileged communities. Her words were eloquent, almost poetic, but Piers sat back, biding his time. He knew how to wait for the right moment, the question that would break the rhythm, the one that would expose the cracks beneath the polish. Outside the studio, the world was already reacting. Clips were being posted in real time. Tweets analyzed every subtle gesture. Headlines flashed across news apps. Piers and Meghan face off live. A royal reckoning on morning television. The ratings spiked within minutes. But inside the studio, something else was happening, an invisible shift. Piers began to lean forward, elbows on the desk, eyes fixed on Meghan as if studying her every move. He didn't interrupt, not yet. He simply let her talk, his expression unreadable. It was the calm before the storm. Behind the glass in the control room, the executive producer, Simon, watched closely. He'd seen Piers clash with politicians, actors, and CEOs, but this was different. This wasn't about policy or film promotion. This was personal. Years earlier, Piers had known Meghan briefly before her royal fame, and their falling out had become tabloid fodder. Now both had reputations to defend and egos on the line. At precisely 8:16 a.m., Piers turned slightly toward the camera, his tone shifting. "Meghan," he said slowly, almost casually, "many people admire your passion for speaking out, but there are also those who say your public image has become, let's say, heavily managed. That much of what we see, the interviews, the documentaries, the speeches, feels orchestrated, that you're less authentic and more PR strategy. What do you say to that?" It was the first direct hit. The air tightened instantly. Meghan smiled faintly, the kind of smile meant to disarm. "I think when you're a woman in the public eye, people often mistake professionalism for manipulation," she replied. It was a smart, measured answer, but Piers wasn't done. He pressed on. "But isn't it true that several of your former staff have accused your office of silencing them, that certain media appearances were planned specifically to paint you as a victim?" Meghan's eyes narrowed slightly, barely perceptible, but enough for anyone paying attention to notice. "I won't engage in gossip," she said calmly, but her tone carried an edge. The producers in the control room exchanged glances. This was it, the energy they knew was coming. The studio audience sat frozen, unsure whether to breathe. Even Susanna looked uneasy, sensing the temperature drop between them. The dialogue remained civil on the surface, but beneath it was pure warfare, a battle of narratives, fought with smiles and carefully chosen words. By the time the first commercial break approached, Twitter had exploded. Clips of the exchange were already circulating online. Viewers divided instantly into camps, Team Piers or Team Meghan. Some praised her composure. Others celebrated his audacity. The comment sections burned with debate, each side convinced they were witnessing either a takedown or a triumph. As the red light above the camera dimmed for the break, Meghan leaned back slightly, taking a sip of water. Piers remained still, eyes fixed on his notes, but his expression was unmistakable. He smelled the shift. She wasn't just here to talk about charity. She was here to rebuild her public image, and he had every intention of stopping her. The floor manager counted down again for segment 2. The crew moved quickly, adjusting cameras and microphones. The hum of anticipation returned, stronger this time. Outside the studio, headlines continued multiplying. Every newsroom from BBC to Sky News was preparing to replay the moment. And as the show returned from break, one truth became clear. Whatever was about to happen next would not just be another talk show interview. It would be a cultural clash, royal image versus journalistic reckoning. The kind of moment that would dominate front pages and define careers. And Piers Morgan, true to form, was just getting started. The red light above camera one blinked back to life. The opening jingle faded. Good Morning Britain was live again. The first round of politeness was over, and the studio carried a new kind of stillness, that charged quiet that comes before a storm. Meghan straightened her posture, fingers loosely clasped on her lap, eyes set forward. Across from her, Piers adjusted his papers, though he wasn't really reading them. He already knew where this conversation was going. Susanna tried to keep the tone light as they returned. "We were just discussing the Duchess's foundation work and some of the media challenges that come with being in the public eye." Her voice was calm, almost pleading for civility. But Piers was already leaning in, his gaze sharp, his words carefully chosen to pierce. "Yes, challenges," he said with a faint smile. "But challenges of one's own making, perhaps. Meghan, you've said many times that the press misrepresents you, yet you've also used the media when it suits your message. How do you reconcile that?" The question landed like a drop of ink in clear water, subtle at first, then spreading fast. Meghan didn't flinch. She was prepared for this. "Piers, I believe in using my platform responsibly. There's a difference between telling your story and allowing others to distort it. I've learned that if you don't speak your truth, someone else will speak it for you." It was a polished answer, delivered with the same poise she'd perfected through countless interviews. But Piers wasn't after polish. He was after authenticity, or at least the cracks beneath the performance. "So when you spoke your truth in that famous interview," he continued, "do you think you told the whole truth?" "Because some might argue that what we saw was more narrative than honesty." Susanna shifted uncomfortably. The crew in the control room leaned closer to their monitors. The director whispered, "Stay on camera too." Tight shot on Meghan's face. The nation was watching, waiting for the response. Meghan exhaled softly, keeping her voice calm. "Piers, it's interesting that you question a woman's sincerity when she speaks about her experiences. That says more about the culture of doubt around women's voices than it does about me." Piers smiled faintly, the kind of smile that doesn't reach the eyes. "With respect, Meghan, this isn't about gender, it's about credibility. You've spoken about being silenced by the institution, yet here you are, with one of the biggest platforms in the world. Doesn't that sound like someone who's been heard quite clearly?" the audience murmured. Meghan's composure didn't waver, but her tone grew firmer. "Being heard and being understood are not the same thing. People listen selectively, especially when they've already decided what they want to believe." Outside, Twitter lit up again. Viewers began choosing sides in real time. Half admired Meghan's calm restraint. The other half cheered Piers for refusing to let her control the narrative. News sites were already drafting headlines. Clips were being clipped and uploaded before the interview had even ended. The show was trending across the globe. Inside the studio, the atmosphere had thickened. Even Susanna, who had mastered the art of balancing tension, looked uneasy. "Let's take a moment to talk about the charity initiatives," she said, trying to steer the conversation back to neutral ground. But Piers ignored the cue. "No, I think it's important we stay with this," he said, his tone firm. "Because, Meghan, many of your critics feel that what we see from you isn't authenticity, it's performance. Carefully crafted moments designed to tug at sympathy. When you speak about pain, is it because you're healing or because you're branding?" A hush fell over the set. It was the kind of question that hung in the air long after it was spoken. Meghan took a beat, as though weighing every syllable of her reply. "Piers," she said quietly, "when people share their experiences, that's not performance, that's courage. If my words help even one person feel less alone, then I've done something worthwhile." The sincerity in her tone was undeniable, but Piers pressed on. "Yet your former staff allege otherwise. They say your image is manufactured, that the compassion you preach privately doesn't always match your public face." Susanna interjected quickly. "We should be mindful about discussing allegations without verification," she warned, a subtle plea for moderation. But the studio could feel that line had already been crossed. The balance of civility was slipping. Meghan's smile thinned. "I've heard all the accusations and they're hurtful," she said, "but I choose not to retaliate. People project their own narratives when they can't control yours." Her gaze met Piers's directly now, not defensive but resolute. "I think you understand that better than anyone." The statement hung like a blade between them. For a second the air seemed to stop moving. Even the cameras felt as if they were holding their breath. It was the first time Meghan had gone on the offensive, turning his own reputation back on him. The control room erupted in whispers. She hit back, "Keep it rolling. Don't cut." Piers leaned back slightly, a flicker of something unreadable crossing his face, surprise, maybe even respect, but buried beneath pride. "Touché," he muttered under his breath, then said aloud, "So you think this is personal for me?" Meghan's tone was measured. "I think you have opinions and you're entitled to them. But when those opinions shape public perception of someone's humanity, perhaps they should be examined more carefully." Susanna glanced toward the teleprompter, desperate to pivot the segment. But the teleprompter itself had become irrelevant. This was no longer a guided interview. It was theater, live and unscripted. The conversation shifted toward the royal family. Piers's tone grew cooler, more deliberate. You've accused members of the royal household of racism. That's a very serious claim. Do you still stand by it? Meghan's voice softened, but the undercurrent was steely. I stand by my experiences, she said. I didn't make them up to create headlines. The way certain members of the press twist personal pain into profit says more about the system than about me. Piers nodded slowly, but the faint smirk returned. And yet you profit from that system now, don't you? Books, documentaries, speaking engagements. There's a lot of irony in condemning media attention while simultaneously monetizing it. The words landed hard. Meghan didn't answer immediately. Her fingers brushed against the edge of her glass of water, steadying herself. When she finally spoke, her tone was cool, controlled. Awareness isn't monetization. Using a platform to make change isn't exploitation. The problem isn't that people like me speak. It's that people like you decide who gets to be believed. The audience gasped softly, audible even on broadcast. Piers's jaw tightened. The exchange had turned raw now, stripped of pretense. Susanna glanced between them helplessly, her attempts to mediate drowned by the growing emotional current. Every second of it was being broadcast live to millions. Outside the studio, the media world exploded. Screens in newsrooms across London replayed the clip again and again. Commentators were already crafting takes. This is television history, one producer whispered in disbelief. He's not backing down, and neither is she. Back inside, the tension climbed to its peak. Piers leaned forward, his voice low but cutting. You talk about truth, Meghan. But isn't truth supposed to include accountability? You've walked away from royal duties, from family obligations, from criticism, always claiming victimhood. At what point do you stop blaming everyone else? Meghan's jaw set. She took a long breath before answering. Accountability isn't silence, she said finally. Sometimes the only way to hold a system accountable is to walk away from it. I didn't leave to escape responsibility. I left to preserve my sanity. The moment lingered, echoing with something far more profound than debate. The studio fell into a quiet so thick it felt almost sacred. Even Piers hesitated, not out of defeat, but out of realization. For the first time in the interview, Meghan's words carried something that couldn't be easily dismissed: humanity. But then he spoke again, leaning into the confrontation. And yet you still want the sympathy of the public you left behind. You can't have both independence and immunity. If you want to tell your truth, expect people to question it. Meghan nodded slowly, a half-smile forming. I welcome questions. What I don't welcome is judgment disguised as journalism. The camera caught her expression perfectly, calm, wounded, yet defiant. It was a moment that would define the broadcast. In that instant, every viewer watching could feel the shift. This was no longer about royalty or ratings. It was about two people with very different versions of truth colliding live before the world. As the floor manager held up a sign for the next break, the producer whispered into the headset, We've got the clip. It's going viral already. The red light faded again, and the commercial jingle began. But even as the broadcast paused, the energy didn't fade. Piers stared down at his notes, while Meghan sat motionless, eyes forward, her expression unreadable. The commercial break ended, but the atmosphere in the studio had not softened. If anything, it had tightened like a wire pulled too far. Piers and Meghan both knew the next segment would decide how this interview would be remembered. The air felt heavy, almost electric. Even the studio crew, usually immune to tension after years of live broadcasting, could sense they were on the edge of something extraordinary. The red light blinked on again. The jingle faded. Camera 2 zoomed slowly toward the desk. Piers sat upright, pen in hand, eyes locked on the Duchess. Meghan kept her composure, that same calm mask that had carried her through every public storm. But under the lights, even the most perfect masks can start to crack. Susanna opened the next segment gently. Before the break, we were discussing accountability and the challenges of public life. Let's shift slightly to the role of media narratives. It was a diplomatic attempt to cool the air, but Piers interrupted before she could finish. Actually, he said, voice steady but sharper now, I think the public deserves clarity. Meghan, you've spoken often about compassion, kindness, mental health. But you've also attacked the British press and the royal family, the very institutions that once supported you. Do you understand how contradictory that looks? The tone was direct, almost surgical. Meghan's eyes flicked briefly toward Susanna, then back to Piers. I didn't attack anyone, she said quietly. I spoke about my experiences. There's a difference. Piers leaned forward. But your words had consequences. You painted an image of cruelty and neglect. You knew that would shape public opinion, didn't you? Her lips parted slightly, but she didn't answer immediately. The silence was deafening. Every second that passed built pressure, and even through the broadcast, viewers could feel it. I told the truth as I lived it, Meghan finally replied. If that truth makes people uncomfortable, maybe it's because it forces them to look at realities they'd rather ignore. Piers tapped his pen against the desk, a faint rhythmic sound that somehow made the moment feel more confrontational. Or maybe, he said, it's because the truth is flexible when it comes from you. The words hit like a spark on dry tinder. Meghan's composure wavered, barely, but enough for the cameras to catch it. Her eyes flashed, her tone turned colder. Flexible truth, that's an interesting accusation from a man who has made a career out of twisting stories for headlines. A gasp rippled through the small studio audience. Susanna's head snapped toward Meghan, then back at Piers. The control room erupted in whispered chaos. Did she just say that? Keep the cameras tight, tight. Piers straightened, his expression darkening. You've had every opportunity to speak your mind. But you can't blame journalists for covering what you yourself put into the public sphere. That's not cruelty, that's consequence. Meghan's reply was immediate. No, Piers, that's exploitation. When the media profits off someone's pain, that's not journalism, it's cruelty in disguise. Her voice carried a conviction that made even the crew freeze mid-movement. The power dynamic had flipped for a second. Piers knew it and he didn't like it. His tone hardened. You chose this life, Meghan. You wanted the spotlight. Don't act shocked when it shines back on you. Her calm broke. I didn't choose harassment. I didn't choose lies. And I certainly didn't choose being hunted by the same press that hides behind words like freedom of speech while destroying lives. Her words hung heavy in the studio, echoing in the quiet that followed. Even Piers paused, caught between rebuttal and reflection. He glanced at Susanna, who looked ready to intervene, but he pressed forward. Then why are you here? He asked suddenly. If the media is so toxic, why come back to the very place you claim destroyed you? Why sit in front of these cameras again? The question sliced through the air. Meghan hesitated, then answered with measured calm. Because silence doesn't heal anything. You can't fix what you refuse to face. For the first time, Piers faltered. The response landed with more power than he expected, but his pride wouldn't let him yield. He fired back. Some would say you're not fixing anything, you're relaunching. Another rebrand, another attempt to rewrite the past. Meghan's smile disappeared completely. You think pain is branding? She asked. You think trauma is PR? The audience murmured again. Piers tried to maintain control. I think you know exactly how to use pain to your advantage, he said flatly. That was the breaking point. Meghan's hand, resting on the desk, tightened. Do you have any idea what it feels like to wake up every day and see strangers dissecting your family, your child, your worth? You call it public interest. I call it cruelty disguised as curiosity. Her voice didn't rise, but it carried fire. Every syllable dripped with restrained emotion. The studio fell silent. Susanna looked between them, her face pale. The control room whispered through headsets, keep it rolling, don't cut. This is unreal. Piers adjusted his microphone, his tone lower now, more deliberate. I understand public scrutiny. I've lived under it too, but I don't hide behind victimhood. Meghan leaned forward slightly, matching his tone. You don't hide, Piers, because you control the narrative. You sit here every morning and decide who gets to be the villain. You frame people with words they can't escape from. That's not courage. That's cruelty with a script. Her words were calm but devastating. Piers's jaw tightened. The studio lights glared between them like spotlights in a boxing ring. Let me tell you something, he said finally, voice rising. People are tired of your self-pity tour. You talk about empowerment while blaming everyone else for your choices. You left the royal family, you left this country, but somehow you still play the victim. When does it end? Meghan didn't blink. It ends when people stop confusing honesty with victimhood. It ends when truth isn't treated like betrayal. For a moment, they just stared at each other, two forces refusing to yield. The cameras captured every second of it, every flicker of emotion. Then Meghan continued, quieter now but every word deliberate. You see, Piers, I think what really bothers you isn't what I've said, it's that I walked away. You expect people to stay in the box you build for them. I didn't. The words struck like thunder. The audience gasped again. Piers's expression hardened. That's absurd, he said, but the tremor in his voice betrayed him. Susanna jumped in quickly. All right, I think we should take a short break. But before she could finish, Meghan spoke again, this time softer but more cutting. You once said you cared about truth. Then tell me, does truth only matter when it belongs to you? It was the line that would echo across every platform within hours. The perfect reversal, calm, lethal, and unanswerable. The control room went silent. The floor manager froze mid-gesture. Even Piers didn't respond immediately. He looked at her, searching for the next angle, but found none that didn't sound defensive. Susanna finally cut in, voice trembling slightly. We're going to pause for a quick commercial. We'll be right back. The red light blinked off. The broadcast switched to an advertisement. The studio erupted in hushed chaos. Producers whispered frantically. Camera operators stepped back, unsure whether to look at the floor or at the two figures still seated in icy silence. Piers set down his pen slowly, glancing at Meghan. She didn't move. She didn't speak. She simply stared at the empty space in front of her, as if processing the weight of what had just unfolded. The producer approached cautiously. We might cut the last segment short, he whispered to Piers. You've got what you came for. But Piers didn't answer. For the first time that morning, he looked unsure, not defeated but shaken. There was something about the way Meghan had turned the mirror back on him that struck deeper than he expected. Meghan finally stood. She adjusted her blouse, looked briefly toward Susanna, and said quietly, Thank you for the opportunity. Then she walked off the set, head held high, not waiting for the cameras to return. The studio fell completely silent. When the broadcast returned, only Piers and Susanna were at the desk. The host cleared his throat. Well, he began awkwardly, that was enlightening. Viewers at home had no idea they had just witnessed television history. Within minutes, social media erupted. Every major outlet replayed the moment, dissecting every line. Meghan walks out on Piers Morgan. Good Morning Britain turns explosive. The day the Duchess fought back. And in the middle of it all, Piers Morgan sat under the lights, staring into the lens of the camera. For the first time in years, the man who always had the last word didn't seem to know what to say. Morning faded into midday, but the echo of that confrontation refused to die. Within minutes of Meghan leaving the Good Morning Britain set, clips flooded every platform. By lunchtime, the exchange had become the most replayed television moment of the year. Headlines spun in real time, each outlet framing it differently. Some called it courage, others called it chaos. But everyone agreed on one thing: no one had ever seen Piers Morgan look like that before. The ITV newsroom was a storm. Phones rang non-stop, editors shouting across desks, producers rushing between screens showing 20 versions of the same clip. Each time the same moment froze on Meghan's calm face as she asked, Does truth only matter when it belongs to you? That single line had become a rallying cry. In the control room, Simon, the executive producer, watched the rerun in silence. We just broke television, he muttered to himself. He knew exactly what was coming: global headlines, polarized outrage, and record-breaking ratings. It was the kind of media explosion that could both make and destroy careers in a single day. Across the city, Meghan's PR team had already locked themselves in a private suite overlooking the Thames. Laptops open, screens glowing with analytics, they watched the chaos unfold like strategists monitoring a digital war. The video had gone viral on every platform. Supporters flooded social media, praising her composure and calling her the woman who finally stood up to Piers. Her communications director turned toward her. You don't need to say anything yet, he advised. The clip is speaking louder than any statement could. Meghan sat by the window, her tea untouched, eyes distant. It wasn't supposed to be about winning, she said softly. It was supposed to be about being heard. Meanwhile, at ITV headquarters, Piers had locked himself in his dressing room. The noise outside was deafening. Journalists camped in the corridor, PR managers whispering damage control plans, and producers knocking on the door asking for a comment. But Piers said nothing. He sat at the small wooden table, staring at his reflection in the mirror. He wasn't angry, not yet. He was processing. For years, he had built his career on dominance, the man who could outtalk, outwit, outlast anyone who challenged him. But something about that exchange unsettled him. Meghan hadn't shouted, hadn't stormed out in rage. She had simply spoken with clarity and left him standing in the silence she created. Susanna knocked gently. "Piers," he opened the door halfway. "Yeah. They want to run a statement before the evening broadcast," she said. "Something neutral. You okay with that?" He nodded absently. "Say whatever you need to, I'm fine." But he was. The moment he closed the door again, he realized that for the first time he was the story. By early afternoon, the debate had crossed continents. American talk shows replayed the interview with captions like "Piers Morgan confronted on his own show," and "Meghan breaks her silence." Commentators on both sides of the Atlantic argued over who was right, who was wrong, and what the confrontation really meant. Twitter was a battlefield. Hashtags like Piers vs. Meghan, The Truth Question, and Good Morning Drama trended simultaneously. Thousands of posts dissected every expression, every pause, every breath. Some praised Piers for standing firm against celebrity manipulation. Others accused him of bullying, calling for his resignation. By evening, ITV released a brief official statement. Today's interview with Meghan, Duchess of Sussex, featured a robust exchange of views. Good Morning Britain remains committed to open and respectful dialogue. But respectful was not the word trending. That night, Piers returned home to a wall of flashing cameras. Reporters shouted his name as he made his way through the gate. "Piers, any comment on Meghan walking out? Do you regret your words? Is this the end of your time on GMB?" He didn't answer. The gate slammed shut behind him. Inside, he dropped his coat on the chair and turned on the television. Every channel was playing his own face back to him. News anchors repeated his questions, commentators replayed her responses. His phone buzzed relentlessly, messages from friends, rivals, executives, even strangers. Some congratulated him for exposing hypocrisy. Others told him he'd finally gone too far. He muted the TV, poured himself a drink, and sat in the dim light of his living room. For once, there were no words left. At the same time, halfway across London, Meghan stood on her balcony overlooking the river. The city shimmered in the distance, but her thoughts were far from peaceful. For all the praise she was receiving online, she knew tomorrow would bring backlash too. That was how these things worked: admiration today, accusation tomorrow. Still, she felt something she hadn't in years, a strange calm. For the first time, she had faced the man who had defined her public image for years, and she hadn't flinched. The next morning, newspapers across the UK carried full-page spreads. One headline read, "Piers pushed too far." Another countered, "MEGHAN MANIPULATES again." Each paper chose its side. Photos of Piers glaring across the desk and Meghan sitting serenely beneath the studio lights filled every front page. In newsrooms and cafes across the country, people debated it endlessly. Some saw her as defiant and dignified. Others accused her of staged victimhood. Either way, everyone was talking about it. Inside ITV, crisis meetings were held in glass-walled conference rooms. Executives debated whether Piers had crossed a line. Some argued that controversy fueled viewership. Others worried the network's credibility was at risk. Susanna sat quietly in the corner of one of those meetings, exhausted. She had been on that set, she had felt that heat, and she knew neither side would emerge unchanged. "We can't keep selling confrontation as conversation," she finally said. The room fell silent. Meanwhile, across the Atlantic, American networks framed the moment as symbolic. The outspoken journalist representing the old guard, the royal-turned activist representing a new age of controlled narrative. Think pieces filled online columns by the hour. That evening, Piers finally broke his silence. He walked into the newsroom just before the late broadcast, straightened his jacket, and took his seat at the desk. The cameras rolled. He began without introduction. "Yesterday, this show hosted one of the most talked-about interviews in recent memory," he said. "Many have praised it, others have condemned it, but that's what happens when truth and perception collide. I stand by asking hard questions. It's my job. But I also recognize when a moment becomes bigger than an interview. And maybe, just maybe, yesterday was one of those moments." His tone was steadier now, stripped of arrogance. The words weren't an apology, but they carried something unfamiliar in his voice: reflection. Across the city, Meghan watched that segment quietly from her living room. She didn't smile, didn't gloat. She simply turned off the TV and whispered to herself, "Finally!" Days passed, but the storm refused to settle. Memes, parodies, and news analysis continued to flood the internet. You couldn't open a single platform without seeing their faces side by side, one frozen mid-argument, the other calmly defiant. And slowly, a strange shift began. Viewers who had once mocked Meghan for her interviews started to view her differently. Not necessarily as a hero, but as someone who had finally said what millions wanted to say, that media power cuts both ways. Piers, for his part, returned to the set every morning, sharper and louder than before, but something in him had changed. The fury was still there, but so was caution. He had seen what happened when control slipped. The confrontation became legend, replayed, studied, and debated for months. Journalism schools analyzed it. Publicists cited it as a case study in media strategy. And audiences remembered it as the day television stopped pretending to be polite. For Meghan, it marked a quiet turning point. The narrative shifted ever so slightly from scandal to resilience. For Piers, it reminded him that sometimes the story you're writing writes you back. And for everyone watching, it was a reminder that beneath the polished lights of live television, the most powerful thing in the world is not a script. It's truth spoken without permission. The credits rolled that day on Good Morning Britain, but the conversation never really ended. Somewhere in the glow of London's skyline, two people went on with their lives, one rebuilding her voice, the other rebuilding his image. Both forever linked by a morning that started like any other and ended in broadcast history. And as millions scrolled, replayed, and debated, one thought lingered above all else. In a world obsessed with narratives, sometimes the real story is the one that wasn't meant to be told.